Preparing for a cybersecurity at MUFG interview? You've reached Candy Mentor, and this video is for you. We'll walk through 20 key questions you're likely to face. For each question you'll see a sample answer followed by the key points to cover. Subscribe, like, and share, and drop a topic request in the comments. Question 1. How would you explain cybersecurity, and why is it especially important in banking? Cybersecurity is the practice of protecting confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems and data. In banking, I apply defense in. While answering, define cybersecurity, connect it to confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and discuss customer trust, financial fraud, operational resilience, regulatory obligations, and defense in-depth controls. Question 2. What is the CIA Triad, and how would you apply it to a banking application? The CIA Triad represents confidentiality, integrity, and availability. For a banking application, confidentiality means restricting account information to authorized users, using encryption and least privilege. Integrity means preventing unauthorized changes to balances or payment instructions through authorization, validation, and audit trails. Availability means keeping services operational with redundancy, monitoring, rate limiting, and disaster recovery. I would assess every control against all three objectives, because improving one can sometimes affect another. Make sure to cover confidentiality, integrity, and availability, then provide banking examples such as protecting account data, preventing unauthorized transaction changes, and maintaining service during failures or attacks. Question 3. How would you perform a risk assessment for a new digital banking service? I begin by identifying assets, data flows, users, trust boundaries, and business processes. Then I model threats using techniques such as STRIDE, assess vulnerabilities, and estimate likelihood and impact. For a banking service, I examine fraud, account takeover, privacy exposure, third-party dependencies, and availability risks. I map risks to controls, assign owners, document residual risk, and obtain appropriate approval. Finally, I revisit the assessment after architecture, threat, or regulatory changes. In your answer, discuss asset identification, threat modeling, vulnerability analysis, likelihood and impact, regulatory requirements, risk treatment, control ownership, residual risk, and continuous reassessment after deployment. Question 4. What is Zero Trust, and how would you implement it in a financial institution? Zero Trust means never automatically trusting a user, device, application, or network location. I would centralize strong identity, require multi-factor authentication, evaluate device posture, apply least privilege, and enforce authorization for every sensitive request. Microsegmentation would limit lateral movement, while privileged access management would control administrative sessions. I would deploy it incrementally, measure access decisions and business disruption, and preserve carefully governed exceptions for critical banking operations. Be sure to mention continuous verification, least privilege, strong identity, device posture, microsegmentation, policy enforcement, telemetry, privileged access management, and gradual migration from implicit network trust. Question 5. How would you secure privileged accounts used to administer MUFG systems? I would separate administrative accounts from normal user accounts and require phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. Privileged access should be time-bound, approved where appropriate, and granted just in time through a privileged access management platform. Credentials would be vaulted and rotated automatically, while sessions would be recorded and monitored. I would restrict administrator workstations, review access regularly, and maintain tested break glass procedures with immediate post-use investigation and documented oversight. Focus on privileged access management, just-in-time access, multi-factor authentication, separate accounts, session recording, approval workflows, credential rotation, break glass procedures, and alerting on anomalous administrative activity. Question 6. How do you distinguish authentication from authorization, and what common mistakes do teams make? Authentication answers. Who are you? Authorization answers. What are you allowed to do? A user might authenticate successfully but still lack permission to view another customer's account. I enforce authorization server-side on every protected resource, validate token issuer, audience, expiry, and scope, and apply deny by default. Common mistakes include trusting client-side checks, using overly broad roles, and missing object-level authorization, which can create serious banking data exposure. Explain authentication as identity verification and authorization as permission evaluation, then cover least privilege, server-side enforcement, object-level access checks, role design, token validation, and deny by default behavior. Question 7. How would you protect an API handling payments or account information? I would require strong service and user authentication, enforce fine-grained authorization, and use TLS throughout. Requests would undergo schema and business rule validation, with rate limits and anomaly detection protecting against abuse. Payment operations need idempotency keys and replay protection so retries cannot duplicate transactions. Secrets belong in a managed vault, not source code. I would log security-relevant events without exposing sensitive data, and test for broken object authorization and injection. Discuss strong authentication, authorization, input validation, TLS, rate limiting, replay protection, idempotency, secrets management, logging, schema validation, fraud controls, and secure error handling. Question 8. What is your approach to threat modeling a banking application? I start with architecture and data flow diagrams, marking assets, entry points, trust boundaries, identities, and external dependencies. I then identify abuse cases such as credential theft, transaction tampering, privilege escalation, and data exfiltration. Stride helps structure the analysis, while risk ranking focuses effort on realistic, high-impact threats. Each mitigation receives an owner and verification method, such as code review, penetration testing, or automated control validation before release. Mention architecture diagrams, data flow diagrams, trust boundaries, assets, entry points, stride or attack trees, abuse cases, mitigations, prioritization, and verification through security testing. Question 9. Describe how you would respond to suspected credential compromise. I would first validate the alert and preserve relevant authentication, endpoint, and application evidence. I would contain the account by revoking sessions, disabling risky access, rotating credentials, and requiring stronger authentication. Next, I would determine whether the attacker accessed systems, changed data, or initiated transactions, using fraud monitoring and timeline analysis. I would notify stakeholders through the incident process, restore safe access, identify the root cause, and implement preventive improvements. Cover triage, evidence preservation, account containment, token revocation, password or key rotation, scope determination, fraud monitoring, communication, recovery, root cause analysis, and lessons learned. Question 10. How would you investigate a suspicious login detected by a SIEM? I would validate the alert by examining the user, device, source IP, location, time, authentication method, and recent behavior. I would correlate VPN, endpoint, identity provider, application, and transaction logs to distinguish travel or a proxy from compromise. If risk remains high, I would revoke sessions, challenge the user, and investigate affected resources. I would preserve evidence, document decisions, and tune detection rules using confirmed outcomes without weakening coverage. In your answer, explain alert validation, identity and device context, geolocation and timing, impossible travel, authentication factors, correlated events, containment, evidence preservation, and tuning false positives. Question 11. What should an effective incident response plan contain for a bank? A strong plan defines incident categories, severity levels, decision authority, technical responders, legal contacts, communications, and executive ownership. It includes playbooks for ransomware, data exposure, fraud, and service disruption, with evidence handling and chain of custody guidance. The plan should coordinate containment with business continuity and customer protection, while addressing required regulatory notifications. I would test it through tabletop and technical exercises, measure gaps, and update it after every meaningful incident. Be sure to include preparation, roles, severity classification, contact trees, containment, evidence handling, communications, regulatory escalation, recovery, business continuity, exercises, and post-incident improvement. Question 12. How would you secure a cloud workload used by a financial services team? I would begin with the cloud provider's shared responsibility model and establish secure account, network, and logging baselines. Access would use federated identity, short-lived credentials, least privilege, and separate production administration. Sensitive data would be encrypted in transit and at rest with controlled key management. I would protect secrets in a managed service, restrict network paths, monitor configuration drift, test backups, and continuously review provider and workload telemetry for unauthorized changes. Discuss shared responsibility, identity federation, least privilege, network segmentation, encryption and key management, secure baselines, logging, posture management, secrets protection, backup, and continuous monitoring. Question 13. What security controls would you prioritize in a DevSecOps pipeline? I integrate security early without turning the pipeline into a bottleneck. Source control needs protected branches, reviews, and secret scanning. Builds should run software composition analysis, static analysis, infrastructure as code checks, and targeted dynamic tests. I would generate signed, traceable artifacts and deploy only through controlled environments with separation of duties. Findings need severity-based gates, ownership, and remediation deadlines. The goal is repeatable risk reduction, not merely producing more scanner reports. Mention secure requirements, dependency and secret scanning, SAST, DAST, infrastructure as code checks, signed artifacts, branch protection, environment separation, approval gates, and actionable developer feedback. Question 14. How would you manage third-party and supply chain cybersecurity risk? I would classify the data and service criticality before selecting controls. Due diligence should review the vendor's architecture, access model, testing, resilience, incident history, and independent assurance. Contracts should define security requirements, breach notification, audit rights, recovery objectives, and data handling. For software, I would maintain an SBOM, monitor vulnerable dependencies, verify artifact provenance, and restrict vendor access. I would also assess concentration risk and maintain practical exit or contingency plans. Cover vendor due diligence, data classification, contractual controls, security attestations, software bills of materials, dependency monitoring, access limitation, incident notification, concentration risk, and exit planning. Question 15. What is the difference between encryption, hashing, and tokenization? Encryption is reversible with a key and protects data confidentiality, such as records moving between services. Hashing is designed to be one-way and is appropriate for integrity checks or password storage when combined with a unique salt and a slow password algorithm. Tokenization replaces sensitive values with non-sensitive references, reducing exposure in downstream systems. None eliminates access control needs, and encryption is only as strong as its key management and authorization. Explain reversible encryption, one-way hashing, and replacement tokens, including key management, password-specific hashing, payment or account data use cases, and limitations of each technique. Question 16. How would you defend against phishing and social engineering targeting bank employees? I would combine technology, process, and behavior controls. Phishing-resistant MFA reduces the value of stolen passwords, while SPF, DKIM, DMARC, attachment scanning, and URL analysis reduce delivery risk. Employees need simple reporting channels and targeted training based on realistic scenarios, not blame. High-risk actions such as payment changes require independent verification and separation of duties. I would monitor suspicious sign-ins, investigate reports quickly, and use simulations to improve measurable resilience. Discuss phishing-resistant MFA, email authentication, secure workflows, awareness training, reporting, simulation, endpoint protection, privileged user controls, payment verification, and rapid response to suspected compromise. Question 17. How would you design logging and monitoring for critical banking systems? I would define events around authentication, privilege changes, sensitive data access, payment actions, configuration changes, and administrative activity. Logs should be time-synchronized, centrally collected, access-controlled, and protected against tampering, with retention aligned to legal and investigative needs. I would enrich events with user, device, service, and transaction context, then create prioritized detections rather than noisy alerts. Dashboards, runbooks, and tested escalation paths make monitoring operationally useful. Focus on security-relevant events, centralized tamper-resistant storage, time synchronization, identity and transaction context, retention, privacy, alert quality, access controls, and operational response procedures. Question 18. How would you approach ransomware resilience for a financial organization? Ransomware resilience starts with reducing attack paths through patching, segmentation, endpoint detection, phishing-resistant authentication, and controlled privileges. I would maintain offline or immutable backups, protect backup administration separately, and test restoration against defined recovery objectives. During an incident, I would isolate affected systems, preserve evidence, protect critical services, and coordinate legal, executive, and regulatory communications. I would not treat backups as proof of readiness until realistic recovery exercises succeed. Include prevention, segmentation, endpoint detection, immutable backups, privileged access controls, recovery objectives, restoration testing, business continuity, communication, and decisions about containment and ransom demands. Question 19. How would you balance security, customer experience, and availability when introducing stronger controls? I would avoid treating security as a binary choice between blocking customers and accepting risk. I would classify actions by risk, applying stronger verification to unusual devices, high-value transfers, or changed beneficiaries while keeping routine access simple. Before rollout, I would test accessibility, recovery, latency, and failure modes. I would monitor fraud reduction, abandonment, false positives, and support volume, then tune policies with product, operations, risk, and compliance stakeholders. Explain risk-based authentication, customer impact analysis, phased rollout, fallback and recovery paths, accessibility, fraud metrics, false positive monitoring, stakeholder alignment, and evidence-based control tuning. Question 20. Tell me about a time you found and remediated a security vulnerability. In one project, I found an API endpoint that checked whether a user was authenticated but did not verify ownership of the requested account. I reproduced it safely, documented the impact, and notified the service owner through the vulnerability process. We added server-side object authorization, regression tests, logging, and monitoring for abnormal access. I helped validate the fix and reviewed similar endpoints. The broader lesson was to convert one finding into reusable secure design guidance. Use a concise STAR structure, explaining discovery, validation, business impact, communication, safe remediation, testing, root cause, measurable outcome, and how you prevented recurrence. If you are still with us, congratulations! You are much ahead of the rest and serious about preparing for your interview. We hope we were able to add value to your preparation and create some helpful content. Do not forget to like and share this video. Your small act can do great things for us.